this workshop, Addressing Secondary Traumatic Stress Through Reflective Practice and Supervision, is going to review concepts of secondary traumatic stress and introduce reflective practice as an organizational strategy to address professional well-being. And to do that, we have two presenters that are well known and loved by Caltrin because they are returning to us. And the first is Dr. Melissa Bernstein. In her role at Rady Children's Hospital San Diego, Dr. Melissa Bernstein directs the Advancing California's Trauma-Informed System, we call it ACTS around here, initiative. Her work centers around supporting systems in planning for, implementing, and sustaining trauma-informed change that aligns with best practice and science. We'll make sure to introduce you and share some information about ACTS as well in the follow-up email. I'd also like to introduce you to Al. Al Killen-Harvey is the co-founder of the Harvey Institute, a training and consultation company whose mission is improving healthcare outcomes through integrating sexual health. For the past 32 years, he has worked at Chadwick Center, where he has served in a variety of clinical and training positions. He has worked for several decades in the field of trauma treatment and is a past recipient of the San Diego County Child Abuse Coordinating Council's Unsung Hero Award for his work with children who have been abused and or neglected. He is a faculty member of the San Diego Public Child Welfare Training Academy. And we want to say welcome, Melissa. Now, we are so happy to have you here, and we look forward to the discussion.
Wow, Jess, thank you so much for that nice introduction. I always say, I wish I could take you wherever I am and just have you introduce us before anything. So I really appreciate that. Hello, everyone. As Jess said, I'm Melissa Bernstein, and we're really excited to have you all here with us today. This is a topic that is really close to our hearts, and so excited to kind of dive in and talk about how the trauma and the stress that we all experience in the roles that we have, no matter what they are, can really impact us. And there's a lot of different ways that we can address secondary trauma. But today we're really going to focus, as Jess said, on this topic of organizational support. So we've known about secondary trauma for a while. We've known about this idea of self-care for a while, which is very, very important, and we'll talk a little bit about that. But today we're really going to be focusing on shifting from how can we as individuals take care of ourselves to really how can our organizations take care of ourselves as well. And so our focus today will be on secondary trauma and its impacts, and how we can address that through reflective practice and reflective supervision. I will also just mention that Al and I will be pinging back and forth in this presentation. You'll learn a little bit about us. We're a bit informal here, so if you guys have questions, comments, please feel free to throw those in the chat. Like Jess said in the beginning, we really want this to be interactive as well, so your voice is definitely very welcomed here. Okay, so I'm going to be spending just a little bit of time talking about and giving some background around secondary trauma before we dive into one of the ways that we really believe in addressing it. So before we kind of dive in, what I'd like folks to do is also think about all of the training or the experience or the knowledge that you have around child trauma and primary trauma and the impact that that trauma has on kids and families that you support. Because as we go through our conversation around secondary trauma, right, the impact that this work has on us as helping professionals, you'll notice that there are quite a bit of similarities here. And there's a bit of a parallel process going on. So kind of just keep that hat on as we go through this material. All right, so I'm going to be reading two quotes to you all and then asking for some reflection from you guys. So this is the first one here. It says, if you're tough enough and cool enough and committed to your cause enough, you'll keep on keeping on. You'll suck it up. Self-care is for the weaker set. We have the second quote here. This quote is from a book called Kitchen Table Wisdom. And it says the expectation that we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily and not be touched by it is as unrealistic as expecting to walk through water without getting wet. So either in the chat or if you wanted to take yourself off mute, just wanted to get a sense from folks which quote kind of resonates more with you. What are some things that are coming up for you when you hear these two kind of different quotes here? You know, it might take some people some time to find that chat button. So thanks, Emily, for sharing. So one of the first quote, if you're tough enough and cool enough, you'll keep it on, right? That's definitely a sentiment that we've heard for quite a while in this field. Kind of suck it up, I did it, you do it. It's just kind of part of the gig here. Um, Pam said Rachel's quote, loving that this one has become quite popular. So I love that you're familiar with it, using it in your debrief sessions all the time. Wonderful. Um, so both here, right? So we see a lot of different responses, which I really appreciate, and I think is really resonant of people's experiences, which has been quite different around this topic. For some, they've just really been inundated with that idea of like, hey, this is just the gig, this is the work that we do. It's stressful, suck it up, nothing can be done about it. Our hope is that we're really shifting as a field and really have been shifting, and hopefully our organizations are shifting to this second quote here, which is essentially saying the nature of this work is that it's emotional. We're going to have emotions and feelings around the difficult work that we do. And also, we're in an emotional and feelings field, and that is normal to have and to bring up. And so, um, what this really quote and what we're hoping to shift to when we're talking about secondary trauma is that it's expected, it's normal. We all, many of us experience emotions and feelings around this work. And if we know that, then our organizations have a bit of a responsibility to figure out how we can support one another in this. Just really briefly, there's a couple different ways that we can be exposed to trauma in the work that we do. One of those ways is directly, maybe that's by experiencing something like an assault or extreme danger in the work that you do. The other way, I think, is that indirect impact, which can be a variety of things. So it can be hearing a child's story or an adult story of the difficult and scary things that happen to them, reading information, entering data. There's so many different ways that folks can be impacted by the stress of working closely with kids and families who have experienced trauma. And we wanted to bring this up because when we're talking about this topic of secondary trauma, we really want to highlight that this is a topic for all individuals who work in the trauma field. So not just frontline workers, but folks working at the front desk, at maybe your security gate, really everyone involved in your organization can really feel that impact of the impact that trauma has. And I see we've got some agreement there from our folks here, which is wonderful. Wonderful. Okay, so there's a lot of language out there. We're not going to spend too much time on definitions here. We just want to pull apart a couple of terms here as we're focusing on the stress that we can experience in our work as helping professionals before we get to how can we address that. So there's this concept of organizational stress, and that's what we think of as burnout or workplace stress. So anyone in any profession experiences organizational stress, right? So that's like your commute's really long, there's a lot of paperwork, time crunches, salary, the culture, right? So no matter what organization you work in, everyone experiences some of this kind of organizational stress. In the work that we do as helping professionals, again, no matter your role, there's kind of this extra layer here, and that is what we call interpersonal stress. So you might have heard these different terms. One of them is compassion fatigue. This is kind of a broader impact of working in the field, kind of this depleting ability to reduce that ability to cope or have that empathy. And today we're really going to highlight and focus on secondary traumatic stress. It's also termed vicarious trauma sometimes, but we're going to use those interchangeably. And again, it's the emotional stress that we feel taking care, working in an organization that takes care of kids who have experienced trauma, and just the toll it takes on us to kind of bear witness to that. Okay, so I just want you guys to take a second to look at this picture here. One of the things, in a moment, Al will go into talking a little bit more about what secondary trauma can kind of look like tangibly. But just kind of a teaser here, when we're working so close with kids and families who've experienced trauma, we can just really start to see that danger everywhere. And so, again, thinking about how traumatic stress not only impacts our work, but also kind of how we function outside of work too. And with that, I'll pass it over to Al.
Great. Thanks so much, Melissa. I appreciate it. Melissa made a mention earlier of sort of the parallel process between primary trauma and secondary traumatic stress. In a longer presentation, we would have actually spent a good chunk of time at the beginning just reminding people again of what primary trauma looks like for the clients and the families that we serve, because we do see this incredibly interesting sort of mirror effect around that. This slide is one kind of opportunity to kind of look at that in that way. What you see on the left are just a couple. First of all, just a big caveat to this. We know, even though we know a lot about trauma now, more than we've ever known before, what we continue to discover over and over and over again is that trauma is uniquely personal, right? We can generalize a bit about how an individual may respond to a traumatic event, but each person is going to respond very individually based on a variety of factors, history and experience, developmental abilities, family history, etc. But secondary trauma, additionally, is also uniquely personal. How we absorb the tension and the pressure and the emotions and the feelings of our work is going to look different from each of us. But we will talk in generalities about some of the things that we see. In this first column on this slide, what you see are just a couple of sort of typical symptoms of primary trauma. So we know that many times kids and families that experience primary trauma have intrusive symptoms, right? They have thoughts and feelings that just sort of all of a sudden kind of rear up in the middle of nowhere. An avoidance of certain stimuli, certain things that remind them of what might have happened to them, or the hurt or the pain or the abuse that they experience. And so they try to work around that consciously and many times unconsciously. That negative kind of introject of just feeling that you're worthless, you're no good, you deserved what happened to you. And then this sort of hyper arousal, which that slide that Melissa just showed kind of showed, seeing danger everywhere, always being on alert, never being able to relax. Those are just a few of the sort of symptoms that are not unusual to see in somebody that's experienced primary trauma. Well, we see actually variations of that in terms of how it manifests itself for us, those of us in the helping professions, and how it plays out, which we would then label as secondary traumatic stress. So that intrusive symptoms that we talked about may play out as that case that you're working on, that family that you've been working with, that kid that impacts you in some way, and you can't let go of that. The case may even be closed. It may have been closed a long time ago, and you find yourself still, period. I wonder where they are. I wonder what happened. I'm still feeling sad about them, or I'm still feeling protective of them. You just can't seem to kind of shake that. Similarly, there may be times where there are certain cases or certain reports or certain tasks that we do on our job that we find ourselves finding a million other things to do and never getting around to that one and avoiding it, because there may be some conscious or unconscious understanding that underneath that might be something that's going to emotionally kind of activate us. And so we begin to avoid that. Certain clients that you just pray they don't show up for their session, or they're not there when you go do the house visit, right? Even though you don't want to admit that as professionals, we never want to admit that, but we have those. What's that about? What's going on in that case? It might be activating some of your own history. And so this is a way to sort of kind of protect yourself from having to deal with that. And separating our work from our home life. This has become much more difficult now in the Zoom world because many of us work from home as well. But we're talking beyond that. We're talking this idea of really not being able to shut down work when you really are on your personal time, on your downtime. Many times we find this out about ourselves, not because of our own understanding of it, but because others begin to tell us that. Do you know all you do, even when we're out on a Saturday night, is talk about your job? Or our kids start to say, "You're no fun anymore. You used to be a lot of fun and you're not fun. You sleep all weekend. You're not happy." Those kinds of things that we start to hear. That's our absorption of this emotion and feeling of the work that we do. And this kind of treating others in a very different way. We know that many times one of the signs of primary trauma is that, for example, if it's happening for children, parents start to see a difference in their personality. The kid was very outgoing, and now all of a sudden they're very kind of constricted. They don't have a social network any longer. We can see that happening for us as well. We can see it in our colleagues as well. Somebody that used to be quite joyous and really active in team building and now is either quiet or bitter or cynical. People begin to treat colleagues differently over time because they haven't had an opportunity to process those emotions and feelings. So what we'd like to do is to get just a little bit of a flavor for how this lands with you and your experience around this, and then to share with you a little bit of what we have discovered by giving this presentation countless numbers of times to now many thousands of individuals. So what I'd like you to do, we're going to do a poll here at this point. I'd like you to look at those 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 categories in the sort of teal categories, those sort of symptoms, if you will, and I'm going to use that term very, very loosely. I want you to look at those 7, and I want you to think for yourself, have I experienced 3 or more of those in the past 3 months? So think over the past 3 months, and as you look at those, have 3 or more of those resonated with you? And if they have, we're going to ask you to put yes in the poll. If they've not, then we're going to ask you to put no. Now, obviously, this is confidential, so we're only going to see the yes or no. We don't know who it's coming from, so hopefully that's as safe as possible. So 3 or more yes or no in the poll. We'll give you a few seconds to think about that.
I can't see the results, so I'm excited.
So hopefully everyone's had a chance. So if we could share the poll results now. Great. Okay, so the poll results 63% yes, 37% no. Before we talk about what we found with other organizations, if you want to put really quickly in the chat box, just looking at that result, that now what we are gauging there is we're not diagnosing, but those are potential signs of secondary traumatic stress. So in this audience of professionals today, 63%, right, more than half say, yep, I've probably been experiencing those in the past 3 months. Just that survey result alone, quickly just put a word in the chat box that tells me how you feel about that, whatever that is. When you see that number, that sad, thank you for that. I appreciate it. This is so true about our work. Yep. Anybody else? Stuck, thanks. It's probably actually higher. We hear that a lot.
We do.
Yep. Concerned. Yep. Appreciate it. What we seldom hear in there is surprised, right? Almost nobody says, I'm shocked by that. So we all sort of know this is happening. And yet, historically, our organizations, agencies, and professions have done very little to do anything about it, even though we all know that it's out there. So thank you. And Terry, you're right on track with me. So hopefully things like today's conversation are ways for us to begin to address this because it's not new. And we all know it's been there. When Melissa and I have done this in the past, on average, we get about a 70 to 75% of the folks say yes, regardless of which disciplines in our kind of broader MDTs that we're talking to, no matter how long they've been in the field, how short they've been in the field. So you're right in there. You're roughly right in there with everyone else. So it is a huge issue here. So with that, I'm going to move it back to Melissa.
Thanks, Al. All right, so I really like to throw up this cartoon here. And so what you're kind of looking at here is this idea, and hopefully you guys see this as a joke. We always say pizza parties are super wonderful, and we are never like dissuading organizations from having pizza parties. But what we know is that when we're talking about secondary traumatic stress, a pizza party is really not the thing that's going to cut it. Right. And oftentimes I saw someone in the chat put self-care. That's usually what folks are saying, right? So we're experiencing the secondary trauma. We're experiencing those behaviors, thoughts, and feelings that Al was just going over. We've got really well-meaning organizations, but then it's just, hey, take care of yourself. Or here's this, social worker appreciation day, which again is important, but what we're noticing and what we're finding in the field is that, that's not enough. And so really what else can we do? So we're going to spend the rest of our time today really talking about reflective practice and reflective supervision as one way that we believe really strongly is a beneficial way to address secondary trauma. But we want to acknowledge that there's lots of different ways too. So individual strategies are really important. Although a lot of people have different feelings about self-care, self-care is very personal, very individualized, and knowing for yourself what um, you need to take care of yourself is incredibly important. And we definitely recommend taking time off from work and actually taking that time off, really being present in that time off, seeking some counsel, whether that's therapy, spiritual, what have you, to be able to talk about the impact of this. There are really important things that we each can do to take care of ourselves. Do we need a lot of training on that? I'm not so sure. But, I think we all know ourselves quite well and hopefully spend some time kind of reflecting on what's best for us. This other kind of bucket over here is something that maybe we've spent a little bit less time around, which is those organizational strategies. So within the workspace, what can we do to start addressing the emotions and feelings that come up around this work? Because just like you all said in the chat, and just like we saw in the quote, it's a bit inevitable, right? We have feelings around this work. So trainings like these, right? Being able to open up and talk about it and see that so many of our colleagues, so many of our peers in this field also experiencing what we're experiencing, right? That's very connective. That's really important. So having our organizations have space to talk about this, to train on this, that's really important. Some organizations do things like crisis debriefing, which is more of that kind of one-time after the fact support after a crisis occurs. What we're going to spend, again, the majority of our time on today is this concept of reflective practice, which is really more of a proactive approach of figuring out in what spaces in our organization, and we're going to focus more on supervision today as that space, can we start to talk about and open up and normalize within our organizations with our colleagues, talking about the emotions and feelings that this work brings up, and supporting one another with those feelings. So Al, I'll pass it back to you.
Thanks so much. I appreciate it. So I've spent a lot of my time in the past few years really thinking about this idea of reflective supervision. Now, aspects of this, for those of you that come from a different generation, like mine, some of this were things that were actually just very much incumbent, certainly in the behavioral health arena, very much incumbent upon what we expected in supervision. Supervision, by its very nature, included talking about the emotions and feelings and the transference and countertransference that could get activated by working with clients. Over time, a lot of that has kind of been lost in our field. And so reflective supervision actually incorporates some of that, in addition to how we're going to apply it here, because we're looking at it through the lens of working in trauma-informed and trauma-focused organizations, why it is really incumbent there for this idea of the emotions and feelings to be addressed as well. So we use this term reflective supervision. Other people have used other words to describe that process. But since we are using that language, the first thing I want you to think about is when you just hear that, whether you're familiar with the concept or not, when you just see those words, reflective supervision, what comes to mind for you? What do you think reflective supervision would incorporate that maybe currently general supervision doesn't incorporate? You don't have to answer it publicly. You can go inward with that if you want. But I want you to just think about that for a second. What first comes to mind for you when you hear reflective supervision? So we're going to describe to you what we mean by that. And next slide, please. Thanks. Next one after that, Melissa. Thanks for that. There you go. So for us, what we're talking about in reflective supervision is making sure, making a priority that in our interaction with folks that we are providing support to, that there is space to talk about the emotions and feelings related to the work. Now you're going to hear me and you're going to hear Melissa say that phrase over and over and over again because it is so crucial to the rest of this conversation. The emotions and feelings related to the work. One of the biggest concerns that we get from organizations, leaders, supervisors, even staff members, when we begin to present this idea is, oh no, 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 I don't want to open up that Pandora's box around emotions and feelings because I don't want to be the therapist for my staff. Is that what you're asking me to do now? Now I've got to take on all of their personal problems in addition to everything else I'm trying to manage as a supervisor or as a manager. And really, the thing that keeps us clear around all of this is no, we're not asking you to do that, but we are asking you to be available to be present for the emotions and feelings that are being elicited in the job that you're asking your staff to do. That part we don't think is beyond the scope of what we should be doing, right? But that part gets ignored as well. I think partly out of that fear of, oh, is it going to open this whole other arena up? So I'm not going to welcome in any sort of emotion or feeling around that. And we really are encouraging folks to take a look at that. The work that we do, we all know, as we saw in the poll recently, the work that we do has to pull out emotions and feelings for us. None of us got into this field because we're uncaring individuals. We care. We care about others. We want to make a difference. We're empathic. And as a result of that, working with folks that have experienced some of the most horrific things that can happen to people, we are going to absorb that. So why is there not a space to talk about what that feels like? That's not unprofessional. As a matter of fact, I would argue that is the most professional thing that we can do, is to acknowledge the full array of both our cognitive and our emotional self that is at play when we're doing the work in the trauma field that we're doing it in. Next slide for me, please, Melissa. So reflective supervision suggests that we can create that space, not at the expense of also addressing all those other things that we have to do as supervisors. Again, one of the hesitancies we get with organizations when we're presenting this is, I, as a supervisor, have so much on my plate, and now you're telling me there's more I have to do. How am I ever going to fit that in? Or what happens if the staff only want to talk about the feelings that are going on, and I've got a whole laundry list of tasks that we've still got to get done? We believe that the two can coexist. We even suggest that by addressing the emotions and feelings in an appropriate way and with boundaries, which we'll demonstrate in a few minutes, you actually end up with staff that become more effective, more efficient, and so your task list actually becomes shorter. So for those of you that haven't been doing this, you're going to have to take me at my word on this one for right now. But that has certainly been our experience, and it's certainly been my experience as a reflective supervisor over years. So this isn't an either or, it's an and. We can provide space to talk about all of those important tasks that have to be done and still provide some space for what's it like to be working within this arena and what emotions and feelings do you carry with you. We do expect that this happens consistently. It may not happen in every session, depending on what's happening. It may be one of those times where, as a supervisor, I have just got to get certain things done. We've got a certain limited amount of time, and it's really task oriented. That can happen. We got that. But if you find that after kind of thinking about this and you're wanting to embrace this, that you never seem to have time for the emotions and feelings related to the work, we really want to challenge that. What is that about? Might that be about you in terms of where you are in processing your own emotions and feelings, and maybe being hesitant about opening that up? Because we do believe there are ways to incorporate reflective questions and reflective process in almost every encounter with our staff. It can be done very simply. It can be done more extensively. And we'll talk a little bit more about that after we show a demonstration of this. The entire idea of welcoming in, what was it like to have that mother or father or grandparent or attorney or colleague react to you in that sort of way? Sounds like you handled it perfectly. You got the job done. But what was it like to have that happen? I'm just inviting you in if you wanted to talk about that at all. That's a reflective question. No judgment, just an opportunity to not carry it alone. And I, as the supervisor, want to welcome that in. Now, that seems in some ways, maybe for a lot of you, and certainly to me when I was first thinking about this, relatively benign. Why not? Why not do that? We should all be doing that, of course. But of course, what that's also based on is that there is an inherent sense of trust between the supervisor and the supervisee. And that is not always true. So this becomes a real challenge in reflective supervision. If that trust has been violated, if there is a lack of really feeling safe, psychologically safe with somebody in an organization, reflective supervision is going to be a bit more challenging. Melissa, when we present together to in a larger format, Melissa often adds to this piece, however, but reflective supervision can also be a way to repair when trust has been broken within an organization. So again, a lot of this will make a bit more sense after we show the demonstration and we can be a bit more concrete, but I wanted to lay at least the foundations for reflective supervision can look like. Next slide, please. So in its very kind of practical and pragmatic ways, reflective listening and questioning really involves a series of asking an open-ended question around some emotion or feeling related to the work. What was that like? How did it feel? What are you carrying with you right now? And this is probably as good a place as any to add to this, that the reflective questions can be about the stressors of the work, as well as the joys of the work. And we'll talk about that near the end of the presentation. But what did you feel good about? What are you proud about? What's one accomplishment that you had? So it's inviting that in. It is always, we describe it as always consensual. The person can go there or not go there. That's up to them. The person can then verbally share it with us or not share it with us. That's up to them. So I often will ask my supervisees a reflective question and just ask them to go inward, but I don't need to know where they went with it. It's just their opportunity to get a minute to think about that aspect of something maybe they've never done before. If they do choose to share it with me, then what I want to do is I want to reflect back. So it's a two-part reflection. They reflect it inward, they share it with me, and then I want to reflect back what I heard. So what I heard from you was, what it sounds like is, and to make sure that I got it right. I'm not criticizing it. I'm not embellishing it. I'm just wanting to make sure I got the essence of it. I'm also not trying to parrot it. I'm not trying to give them exactly what they said because I can't do that. I want them to know that I got the essence of it. And if I got it wrong, then I want to check it again. Um, Part of the reflection that has been really challenging for me, Melissa and I are both originally from the East Coast, from the New York area. And so we both operate at a pretty quick speed and reflective practice really encourages us to slow down a little bit. So I've had to learn to, when somebody says something to me, to take a deep breath, to take it in a little bit before I react. And so what you see there on the slide, that's waiting 3 or 4 seconds idea is that we often find when we are just quiet after asking a question for a little period of time, we actually get a much fuller answer than if we respond immediately. When people are left to sit with something for a moment, they actually think a little bit more, open up a little bit more, and give us a much more expansive sort of response. So think about that in terms of the ways that you invite people in during your supervision.
And I'll just add
Yeah,
on to just to
please.
give you a little bit of a breath before our
Thank you.
demonstration here too. Um, so oftentimes we hear, oh, I do this. I'm really connected. I ask my staff or my peers or my colleagues like how their weekend was. That's how I start off my supervision. And of course, that humanness is so important. And of course, we encourage that. But again, that's different to what we're talking about here, where Al has really highlighted the emotions and feelings related to the work. It is really kind of what we're talking about. So not just connecting personally with folks, but really connecting around the emotions and feelings related to the work. And then one other piece I'll just share. We often get, for some folks hearing this, they're like, oh my God, this is me. This is who I am. I'm a reflective supervisor. Great. We hope this is really reinforcing and validating for you. For other people, it might be a little bit more foreign and really they're really interested in it and just kind of want those skills and tools to be better and practice more. And so that's something that we'll provide towards the end of this as well. And then the last thing I'll share too is I know when I started this and when we work with folks around reflective practice and reflective supervision, I feel like the norm is the first step in practicing this is to realize how often you could have done it but didn't do it and then come back to it later. So it's never too late. So if you're in a supervision and you're realizing there's emotions and feelings around the work, oh, and maybe this is the time to ask that reflective question, but I just didn't. That is usually the first step of kind of this practice. And so that might make a little more sense after the demonstration, but just wanted to highlight that too.
Great. Thanks, Melissa. And I'll add one other piece as
Of
well.
course.
You talked about it from the role of the supervisor. For the supervisees, there is also variations in response. Some of our supervisees are going to jump on this right away. They've been waiting for it. They've been sort of kind of asking us to do it anyway. And others are going to be very hesitant. Some are going to be ambivalent for a while. They're not quite sure why all of a sudden you're asking me these questions you didn't before. What's that about? Am I in trouble? And others, this is just never going to resonate for them. It's not who they are. It's not how they operate. And so we need to allow for that as well. Nonetheless, even in that last category with my staff that said, I'm not a processor around that. I'm good. I'd let you know if something was up. I appreciate that, but I am going to invite you in periodically. You can always say pass, but even with those in a supervision, I'll say, I know you're not a processor, but boy, that case, it was interesting to me what came up for me. I'm curious if there was anything else around that feeling wise that you wanted to talk about. If not, I get it. I know you don't normally go there, but I just want to offer that because you never know. Sometimes even that person that says, this isn't me, I don't do that kind of stuff, there may be a time in which something does happen. And now they feel like they boxed themselves in a corner because they said, I'm not the type that does it. Now they need your invitation to kind of go there. So kind of keep that in mind as well.
Now we get to spend a little time reflecting on that reflective conversation. So I'm just going to open it up to the group. What were some things that you guys noticed? Again, we're really going to be focusing on Al for right now. What were some things that you noticed that Al was doing in that conversation? Just first things that come to your mind, the things that you guys picked up on. And again, you guys can add this in the chat. I think it's okay to unmute yourself as well. Whatever feels most comfortable. So Alicia says active listening, checking for understanding. Okay, they're coming in hot now. Nonverbal. Okay, so I'm going to take one at a time. Start with the active listening. Yeah, and I think that's a word that's kind of thrown around a lot too. And so I really think all of the other things that Al did really demonstrated, like the feeling that Emily reported feeling from being heard and being listened to. So the checking for understanding, Al often checked in, hey, did I get that right? That's a really big part of reflective practice, right? We're really listening, we're repeating back. It looks like, let's see here. A lot of that reaffirming, validation, folks are sharing. So I'll reflected a lot back what Emily shared, and then checked for that understanding, like Angelita said, hey, did I get that right? Is that what you meant? I don't want to go too far with that, right? And so that's a really big part of reflective practice. Those nonverbal engagements. So again, that's really hard in the fast-paced work that you all do. But when it's possible, of course, it's just a demonstration. It really does make a difference when we're having these conversations. If we're kind of behind that computer checking our phone, what? Yeah. Versus that eye contact, being turned towards you, the head nods, all of those kind of nonverbal things are really important. And I think, like Alicia said, that helps that other person feel like Al was present in that conversation. Taking time and not rushing, which again is a big part of reflective practice and maybe the hardest part of reflective practice. So we always say, make sure you have the time to do this. Of course, again, demonstration, but in real life, if you have a meeting in 3 minutes, maybe not the time to have a conversation with Emily about the joys and the stresses of her work. Really trying to make sure you have the actual time, but also the emotional space to be able to ask those questions and come off as genuine and real, because people can really tell when that's not the case. Again, very calm. So all of these good kind of verbal skills. So a bit of like reframing. So Al really reflected back what Emily said, but not in a word for word kind of way, right? It was really not, just parroting back exactly, but what he took from it. So Emily expressed herself so beautifully. It'd be hard for Al to just parrot word for word and for that to come off as feeling heard. So all we're trying to do when we're in reflective supervision is really just be present and take in what we heard and share that back and ask if we got that right for what's true for us. So that's a really important part. Jessica, I think this is great. So Al added that he isn't trying to put words in her mouth and ask for clarification. So sometimes folks will be talking, and if we're not tracking, it is perfectly appropriate and always helpful. Or we're understanding something, but we're not 100% sure if we understood it right, to check in with that and say, okay, this is what I heard, but can you clarify? Are those the right words? When someone in the beginning said active listening, I really think that's such a way that the other person feels that they're being actively listened to. So that's that feeling of being heard that we get, those kind of check-ins. So that's really wonderful. And then thanks, Jess Matley, for adding that a huge part of reflective practice is about listening and about reflecting. And you'll notice we haven't talked about problem solving or fixing at all. There are definitely going to be moments where that is needed. And I might care to say that that's a majority of your job is problem solving and fixing. But when we're talking about reflecting on the emotions and feelings, we're really talking about not trying to solve those for folks, but really just listening. And we often joke that this is a good skill to use with our colleagues, but also with our friends and families as well. And so we'll talk a little bit more about that, I think, as we get into the skills, but definitely this is not, there might be opportunities. Al always shares that it's helpful to also ask what people want, right? So, hey, I heard you share that. I want to check in, I'm reflecting back what you're feeling and what I'm hearing. You know, do we want to solve this problem? Is this a time for us to fix this, or are we looking for just some listening and to clarify that? And that's good too to do. Lots of affirmations, lots of validations. And again, those validations just come from him reflecting back what he heard, right? And so that can be really powerful. Yep, and again, that non-rushing. So again, we really highlight making sure that you have time for doing this. So such good comments and things there. And I hope also one of the things I noticed was that, again, one of the fears that Al had mentioned in the beginning is that a lot of folks are worried that this is going to come off as therapy. There were a lot of times Al could have dug deeper into something and didn't, right? Because it's not. This is about the feelings related to the work, and Al just reflected what those feelings were, checked in, and said, I really appreciate you sharing that with me, and then asked kind of another question. And so that is kind of that divergence from digging deep to find the why of like therapy, and really just being there to hear and reflect and listen.
I'm just going to add, for context purposes, again, a reminder that I was trying to demonstrate a variety of different reflective questions, and that we're not suggesting that all of those would be asked every time in a supervisory session. But even if it was, to play with that, even if it was, what you saw there, I was tracking myself, it was about 12 minutes that Emily and I had that conversation. If you were to have the luxury of 12 minutes sometimes in a supervision, look at what that elicited, just 12 minutes, that opportunity. But we would suggest even just one of those questions periodically will still begin to elicit some of that sort of response, as Emily indicated, of really being heard and listened to and understanding a part of the job that oftentimes doesn't get talked about. The other thing to bear in mind is, for today's purposes, we are only focusing on kind of this introductory piece. This is what I call like siloed questions, what I did with Emily. They're just a series of questions that you can ask. You can ask them at the beginning of a supervision, you can ask them at the end of the supervision, and they elicit some question. Those are wonderful, and they're a great starter. When reflective supervision really becomes integrated into what you do, what you will find is that it's even more meaningful when you can attach them to what's actually going on in the moment. So I don't ask it right of Emily. Emily's bringing in, she's talking about a case, things are going on, and then she reports to me what happened and the report that got filed and the way that the youth responded to her, and she's ready to move to the next situation that she needs to get my supervision on. Then I might say to her, before we move ahead, Emily, I'm just wondering, I mean, I got everything that you said there, got it. Sounds like it's all under control, but I'm just wondering, just a minute or two, what was it like to watch that kid make that turnaround from saying, I don't want this stuff, to engaging in a 30-minute conversation with you and really setting some goals? I'm just want to invite you in if you want, just for a minute. I know we got a little more to talk about. When it can be tied to something that the supervisee is already talking about, it even feels even more natural and more comfortable and elicits many times an even broader response. So just something to sort of think about.
Okay, I'm going to go ahead and try and share the screen again. Perfect. So again, we talk about the demonstration is a really helpful way to feel what this is that we're talking about. But what we've done is kind of break down all of the components or skills that one can use as a supervisor, manager, leader, whomever, to engage in reflective practice or reflective supervision. And so here's our kind of wheel here. We've got a lot of slides on these skills. We're going to get to as many as we can here. But essentially, this is what you really just heard Al doing here. So the first thing is those curious questions. So, what was that like? How did that feel? So that's a big piece of it. And we have some resources around what kind of curious questions you can ask to engage in reflective practice. The second piece is that active listening, right? The third piece is that reflection back. Then we have other skills around modeling. So briefly, that could be something like, hey, when I had a hard case like that, I was feeling really overwhelmed, just checking in to see how you're feeling. And boundaries are something that we really focus on. So when we're doing this work with counties or in our ACTS work, we'll spend a lot of time on each of these skills, going through them, and kind of expanding around them. Boundaries being, okay, what happens when somebody does go into an area that I'm uncomfortable with? And hopefully we'll talk a little bit about that. And then again, to remind folks that for reflective supervision, reflective practice, we're talking about, like Al did, the challenges of the work that are there, just as important. We're talking about the rewards. And then at the bottom of this whole reflective supervision thing is this idea of our own self-awareness, right? Making sure we have the space to do this, we're in a good mindset, we have the time. That is kind of be really key to making sure this, is genuine and comes off the best way it can.
Melissa, I'm going to jump in for a second because a question was sent to me
Oh, great.
directly, but ties to a little bit of that. So I want to address it.
Yeah, please.
A question that we got today and we get all the time is, how do I keep this from looking like it's just sort of a gimmick or a show that
Good
I'm
question.
doing? We get that all the time, right? And that's really, really important that we talk about that. First and foremost, you have to go inward yourself. Is it a gimmick or a shtick for you, right? If you're just doing this because somebody told you you're supposed to do it and somehow, you're going to reap some big reward, but you really don't care, you're really not all that interested, then we really caution you, don't go there. Don't go there. That's a setup for you. It's a setup for your staff. I don't think the vast majority of us in this field would say that I don't care. We do care. It may be we don't know how to say it. We don't know how to fit it in. We don't know how to find the time. We are worried about the boundaries around it. That's different. So start first by, am I really genuinely interested? And if you are, that's important to then to express to your staff why you're doing it. I'm not just doing it again because I went to a training and they told me I have to ask these questions. What I learned from the training was there's a part of your job that you bring to the job every day that we don't give you an opportunity to talk about. We talk about 90% of your job of what you do, but there's a 10% here that we don't talk about. And I want to remedy that because I want to know because you're bringing all of that to the job. So that's why I'm asking you these questions. I'm not trying to trap you. I'm not trying to find out where you're failing. I'm genuinely curious about this other component of the job. So that's how I would frame it to our staff as well, so they don't see it as a gimmick or a technique. But you've got to be clear in that yourself. And I really appreciate the person that asked that question. Thank you for that, because it comes up all the time. It's a very understandable concern.
Yeah, I think just building off of that for a quick second out too, I think, even sharing, hey, I'm going to be trying this new thing. It's really important to me. I'm really looking forward to trying this. I'm trying with all my staff. So it might feel awkward at first. It feels a little awkward to me. And that's okay too, being transparent. That's a bit of that modeling as well. Like you're modeling those emotions there too. When we do training on this, it's okay to be transparent. Like I did a training on this and this is something that I'm trying out and practicing. And that's definitely has gone over well for some of the folks that we work with.
Okay.
Terry, do you have a question?
Yeah, this is Terry. Thank you for that. Where I'm most challenged isn't the questions. I love digging into that part of it because it is so real. It is the reframing it back
Yeah.
to them. That's where it's like, that's the part to me that feels so gimmicky when I'm repeating it back. And I've tried it in a bunch of different ways. But you know what, Melissa? You just answered the question that I could say, hey, bear with me. I don't mean to sound like I'm repeating everything. I want to make sure that I understood what you're saying to me. You just gave me an idea, so you answered my question before my question.
And Terry, what I would add is, again, because we're doing this, as kind of a foundational piece, what I demonstrated there, over time, I wouldn't do that all the time with a staff member that I'm working with, right? Over time, my summation gets briefer, but again, I do want to make sure
Oh, okay.
there's summation in there to make sure that they know that I heard them, but I wouldn't do that as extensively as was done there once we get into a pattern where they get what's happening here. It's just, I want to make sure that I got it right, what you're talking about. And then I also would add that then piece. And is there more that you need from me after that? That also
Gotcha.
keeps it from sounding gimmicky. It's like, not only did I just say, okay, great. So now you know that I can memorize what you said, but I'm also saying, okay, was that helpful to talk it out? Or do you want to problem solve now? Or was it just you want to make sure that I heard it? Because I hope I demonstrated to you that I got it. I hear it's frustrating, and I realize there's not much that can be done on it, but I get that. I heard that from you. What more do you need from me?
Yeah, got it. Thank you. I
Thanks,
appreciate
Terry.
that.
Appreciate you. Thank you.
Any other questions coming up for folks? Because sometimes it's just a little bit more fun to do it through questions. Okay. All right. So again, we only got, I noticed, like 10 minutes left, so we're not going to be able to dive too deep into all of the skills, but we'll share our website at the end here, and we have a lot of resources on all of these kind of skills and reflective practice as well, if you'd like to kind of dive deeper into this model of reflective practice and reflective supervision. So those resources will be available to you guys.
I'm going to jump in with just two, Melissa, if I can, because they tend to be the ones that come up the most. One is the
Sure.
boundaries. And again, we've addressed that a little bit already, but the boundaries one, like what happens if somebody starts and they just go off into telling me all the personal stuff that's going on? Again, two suggestions we have. One is always frame the question around the emotions and feelings related to the work. Right now, it may be that they have personal things going on that are impacting the work, so that's fair game as well. I've got a sick husband, my kid has got problems at school, and I find myself preoccupied by that. I may say to them, I appreciate that. I hope that you're getting support for that outside of here, and if we have an EAP, remind them of the resources that we have. But let's talk a little bit, given all that's going on, and that sounds really hard. How's that impacting your ability to do your job? How are you finding it? So you always bring it back to the job because that's where you keep the boundaries clean. The other one is modeling that we have in here. And this one I tend to use when folks are a little hesitant. I sense that the staff member doesn't really know whether it really is okay to be this honest and transparent with me, whether they're afraid they're going to be judged. When it's just new and they don't know what it looks like. So by modeling, what we mean is I might say something like, somebody reports something to me and they had a strong reaction from a client or a consumer, and then they want to move on to the task part, and I might say to them, before we move on, I just want to go back and say, did you have any reaction to when that consumer had such a strong reaction to you? Did any feeling in that? No, I was good with it. I know how to handle that. I'm a professional. I wasn't questioning that. I get that. The reason I ask you that is I think about times in the past for me when I've had that reaction from a consumer. And sometimes, boy, even though I know I did the right thing and I know it's their stuff, it still gets to me a little bit. I still carry it a little bit. I'm still driving home reworking it, and that's happened to me. So I just asked to see if that might have happened to you. So modeling kind of says, I too have these emotions and feelings that I carry with the work. So if you're having them, that's normative. It's okay. You can bring it here as well. So think about using that with staff that might be a bit ambivalent around this at the beginning.
Mhm.
Thanks, Melissa.
Yeah, and I'll just say, from our experience working with different organizations around implementing reflective supervision, reflective practice, folks will notice that difference of, okay, so my supervision feels a bit different, like we're doing that reflective thing. And it does tend to become kind of natural and just part of the way you speak over time. In the beginning, folks will ask for it and say like, hey, can I get that reflective moment, please? But over time, it really does just become something that your staff will bring up. They'll start to share their emotions and feelings without you needing to bring in that curious questioning. Or it'll just become a natural part where, you don't have to put a Post-it on your computer being like, remember to ask a reflective question, which is, something that I've done a lot in the beginning when I'm trying to start this out and be intentional about this. Again, this is definitely something that I think comes natural to a lot of folks in the helping profession, but being intentional about using this in the worlds we work in, which are so go, 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 is really where kind of the hard part is. Okay. So just really briefly, I'm just going to kind of go through these a bit quickly here, just to kind of break down the skills. So again, those curious questions that you heard, things like, what's it like for you when? I'm curious, tell me more, I wonder if. These are just, again, like prompts that we can use to start engaging that reflective conversation. Again, knowing that it can be awkward at first. I really like that conversation Terry and I got to have about just being open about that. Active listening, again, these are things that you've seen in the demonstration that hopefully will be more powerful than a slide, but these are here for you as well. Again, listening to hear and understand rather than to fix is a big difference. It's a different kind of mindset that we're having, and we listen in a different way. And so again, going in there knowing that it's really taking our armor down, knowing that I'm not gonna really be here to fix something, but I'm really just here to listen. That reflection, I think, again, we heard and saw that in the demonstration a lot, trying to convey that essence about what you heard, trying to understand that emotion. We have this little fun graphic here. It's a bit in depth, but it's kind of that process. And I think what we're just wanting to highlight in this slide here, and again, you guys will have the slides from Caltrin, which is wonderful. Just a reminder to asking the reflective question, giving that staff the reflective moment is the work. It's not the answer back. It's great if they share back with you what they're feeling. It's great if they give you things, but if they're just taking it silently and using that reflection internally, that's okay too. It's always consensual. They don't have to reply back. It's fine if you offer that space and they think about it internally and have a bit of a breath and a pause and a moment to reflect. They share back, that's wonderful. If they don't, that's wonderful too. Al shared a little bit more about modeling. We have some information here. And then Al, do we want to just touch on reflective practice or go to okay.
Yeah, I think maybe just the one, just to give an idea of what it looks like.
Sure. So we've been talking about how to address the emotions and feelings around the work in supervision, which is a wonderful space to do so. That's where the literature shows the supervisory relationship is so important for people staying in their jobs. And so it really makes sense to focus there. Reflective practice says that we can talk about and create space for the emotions and feelings around the work in a lot of different spaces in our organization. So those spaces can be in the emails that we write, in the unit meetings that we have, in the group meetings that we have, when something big happens in our organization and a leader is sharing that back. There are tons of ways that we can be open and vulnerable about the emotions and feelings connected to the work outside of supervision. I'm not gonna read through this because we don't have the time, but I want to bring this to your attention because it's in the slides. We have an example here of a reflective email communication. We worked with a county, child welfare county around this. So we have their original email, and then we have one that we revised to be a little bit more reflective in nature. And then you'll see here how we did that. So just a small example about how these little things that we do in our organizations, we can step back and think, how can we be a little bit more reflective in these spaces? As we get more reflective as supervisors, that will become kind of there will be more light shed on that too, but we just want to highlight that supervision is a really important place to be reflective, but there's lots of different places and spaces in organizations that we can be reflective, and we definitely encourage you all after this training to kind of think about what those spaces might be as well. Al, you want to take this one?
Sure.
fun one.
You can go inward with this, or if you want to put it in the chat, because we just have a couple of minutes, but we do want to end with giving you a moment to think about one thing that gives you joy in the work that you do. This is a question that we oftentimes don't ask in our day-to-day work. We're so busy putting out fires and dealing with the stressors and all those other things that we have to do that we forget about, that many of us still, we're here in our jobs because there still are aspects of it that are really rewarding. Emily got a chance to tell me a little bit about that in her job. For other folks, just feel free to either again go inward or put it out in the chat box as well, and to sort of own that. When a client or staff sees their success, wow, which is, for us in leadership and in supervisory roles, that's can be a really, really rewarding thing to watch others really kind of find themselves and really accomplish is incredible. Encouraging staff and validating their work. What a great feeling, right? To know that you're fostering others to kind of do this. When participants are given access to information and strategies that help further their impact in the workplace. Great. So each of us has got different roles in our organization, right? And a different lens and a different algorithm that we're going to use for that. But how often do we get to tell somebody about that? I know for me, typically in our team meetings, we have so many other things that we're talking about that it doesn't feel like there's enough time to just say, boy, just this really cool thing that happened in a training and somebody and I, we connected really well. That falls off the radar screen. We've got to make that an opportunity for those kinds of things to come forward periodically. Authentic, intimate relationships in which vulnerability is present. Oh, how beautiful, huh? Enabling my own and others' growth, but grounded in connection. Beautifully put, Alicia. Thank you so much for that. Thanks for sharing that with us. So thank you all for doing that.
Yeah, thank you all. And we'll obviously end here. I just want to highlight what Jess said in the beginning. We have our website, theaxproject.com here. It really highlights the work that we do around reflective practice and supervision. And there's a lot of resources there. So they're all free for folks. If you're interested in this topic and like to dive in more, please feel free to check us out.
Awesome. And I just want to say on behalf of the participants today, and I know they'll start saying thank you in the chat, we just want to say thank you for bringing not just so much information and strategy, but so much passion and experience to this discussion. And I feel like we briefly touched over it, but that last slide, the ACTS project, and Haley has dropped that information into the chat. Is also a project that we, are so grateful for, and is no cost to learners and participants. I'd recommend you check it out. Some things that you might want to know: we do have a survey that we've dropped into the chat that will give you access to a certificate for attendance today. We will send a follow-up email in about 2 days that will have resources that were discussed. And then last but not least, we just wanted to kind of give you a heads up on the next page. Just a little reminder to save the date, because in January of 26, which feels like forever from now, but it won't be, is the 41st annual San Diego International Conference on Child and Family Maltreatment. I will be there, Melissa will be there, Haley will be there. All of us are based out of Chadwick, and so we hope to see you there as well. Just wanted to give you a little reminder that it's coming. With that, we want to say thank you all so much. Thank you, Al. Thank you, Melissa, and thank you to participants. And we hope to see you next time. Have a great afternoon, everybody.